Let's shift gears and bring you this now. The South African edition of the Mercer Global Talent Trends for 2020-2021 has revealed that companies understand that the post-COVID-19 period requires new thinking around talent and skills retention in the workplace. In fact, the report reveals that in order for businesses to survive, organizations should invest more in employee wellness programs and the reskilling of employees to face the future. Now, the survey, which was completed by HR leaders in South Africa, found that technology is a big component of how companies will operate, but businesses will need to be innovative in keeping employees engaged. For more on this report itself, let's bring in Tamara Parker. She's CEO of Mercer South Africa, joining us now via our video link. Tamara, great to chat to you. Thanks so much for making time for us. There were, in fact, 4 main trends that emerged out of this recent survey. I wonder if you can just give us the broad strokes of what the takeaways from these trends are.
Thank you, Ayanda. Good morning, and good morning to your viewers. I think what we saw with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic last year and the lockdowns that followed was the importance of being able to work flexibly. And that relates to a couple of things. One, it relates to understanding that we need to have empathy with all stakeholders, and employees have come forward as, we see that as a major stakeholder. There's also, of course, we know in South Africa our skills shortage is a major challenge to all organizations. So I think it's about looking forward and understanding what are the skills of the future and what do we need to do to be able to get there. I think that you spoke about benefits. I think looking at employees holistically is part of that. And then I also think we're looking at reinventing sustainably. So what is the importance of environmental, social, and governance goals and how those are put into CEOs' agendas. And then I think lastly, is just the ability to be able to use technology and data and how that impacts on the employee experience. We all know that working remotely for some of us has been very isolating, for others has been very tough, people with young children, etc. And everyone is feeling the impact and the effects of being remote for a year. And that is impacting on employees' wellness. And so really importantly, looking at the benefits and holistically and how you support your employees through this period and energizing them for the workplace.
And I wonder how this compares to previous trends from your other reports, because for one, many will be taken aback that it took a pandemic for these issues to be brought to the forefront, unless, of course, we've been grappling with these matters even before COVID-19.
I think that's such an important question, and our survey showed that there were many CEOs and CHROs, HR executives, that were moving towards more digital and more flexible workplaces, but hadn't really got into gear. The organizations that did best during the lockdown period were those who had thought about these strategic issues prior to the lockdown happening. In other words, they had flexible working practices and policies in place, and they had already digitalized to some extent. But I think even those organizations that lagged and are now feeling that they need to sort of catch up, I think it's helping us to see new possibilities. So even the work that we have been doing in organizations prior to the pandemic was probably not, good enough for what we need to do in the next few years. So I think we're all kind of in the same boat, but certainly organizations have been kind of woken up by what has happened last year.
Yeah, I mean, there are several pros and cons for workers themselves, right? And perhaps it's worth us honing in on the possibilities insofar as the pros are concerned. Take us through, it might be an obvious question, but some of the potential benefits for employees specifically in an environment where companies are now thinking so hard about innovation and ensuring the well-being of their workers. I mean, this definitely must come with huge takeaways and a plus for employees who are in those companies.
Correct. I mean, I think the first thing, Ayanda, that I want to point out is that many organizations have multiple workforces, and that there are many workforces that worked during the pandemic, either in essential services or frontline workers and so on. But even there's a possibility to be more flexible. So I think it's important that we look at our employees holistically. We understand that everyone has a different environment, that we embrace empathy, that we look at all our people as individuals and understand what is best for them. But I certainly agree. I think some of the pros, we hear from friends and family and from colleagues, is the ability to spend more time with family, if you have that option, to be able to, you're missing the traffic. I think no one misses traffic. So I think those were some of the pros, and just speeding up, as we said, the technology. And then when you speak about benefits, I think we're heartened to see that more and more companies are improving their benefit offering, understanding that their employees are really struggling during this time, and also the online move towards health checks, towards nudging people in their career goals, in their wealth goals, looking more sustainably at investments. I think these are all positive things that have come out of the last year.
Right. The shift, so to speak, dare I say, could also miss the mark, especially if employers themselves don't take employees along with them. How much of that do you think is taking place?
Correct. I think what's interesting is that when we've spoken to HR leaders in South Africa, that a vast amount of them, 41% of them in fact, realize the importance of empathy and engaging with employees. So we're happy to see that. But of course it means there's another 59% that needs to start looking at that. You know, we are in a talent crunch, and attracting and retaining top employees means that you need to look at them more holistically as people. And it also looks to things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're seeing that those things which used to be kind of surface things that we spoke about are becoming more and more important as we're trying to manage diverse remote workforces. So I'm happy to see that, obviously. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, as we continue reflecting on the landscape and how the world of work is changing, do you envision companies refusing to change, surviving this moment? I mean, nobody had predicted it, but you almost get a sense that everybody is absolutely left with no choice but to introspect and do things in quite a radically different way.
Correct. So of course it also depends on the nature of the business. You know, mining, oil and gas, manufacturing will have slightly different needs and strategies. But certainly what our research showed was, as I said, those organizations that are already digitally transformed or had some kind of flexible working did better during the last year. We also see that organizations that have environmental, sustainability and governance goals outperform their peers. And so I think that these two things are showing us that it would be very hard to go forward unless you were willing to change. One, because your competitors will outperform you, but also you won't be able to attract and retain the talent you need to be successful.
Speaking of competition, where does this leave the more smaller businesses who don't have the economies of scale and scope to be able to keep up with things like technological advancements? Because in some environments, that's almost seen as a luxury, right? Like being able to look after how well your workers are doing at home, for instance, or for argument's sake. Many companies perhaps might be in a position where they feel they're not necessarily there yet.
True. I think there's two things. I think one, digital is a lot cheaper than the old systems we used to see sort of in the 90s and early 2000s. And so I think it is, even smaller organizations are able to get some kind of apps that they could use to manage workforces in that way. But certainly I agree. But the second thing is looking at your HR community and understanding that HR itself needs to transform. Many organizations, for example, are digitalizing in HR, but even then, they're training managers to understand and be able to recognize mental health issues. And it could be just about, how are we flexible as HR? You might be meaning calling your employees every day if they're flexible and understanding how they are. So there are workarounds without digital. Obviously, digital makes it easier, but I still believe that small businesses need to find strategies and ways to be able to manage the world going forward.
Yeah, I must say, sometimes I wonder whether, as the country, we have the environment that would allow for that kind of thing to happen. This time last year, I think even as newsrooms, we hadn't necessarily gotten to a stage where there's a lot of emphasis on having good enough infrastructure to be able to hold virtual conversations like we're doing now. We're so used to people coming into studio, and so resources were distributed accordingly. But, I mean, insofar as infrastructure in the country is concerned, does the environment actually allow us to be able to roll out the type of plans and strategies to survive this moment the way you're explaining?
I mean, I certainly think that the strategies of the South African government and our technology need to be aligned to the way in which business is moving. But, Mercer South Africa covers 40 countries on the African continent, and I certainly believe that there's some countries that are in a worse state than us. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but yeah. I do believe from a digital point of view, we have much of the infrastructure. And then, as I said before, I think, being strategically focused and being proactive in the way in which we operate means that in the event that we cannot use that infrastructure, there are other ways in which we need to work around. So I don't think we can be wholly reliant on technology, but I certainly think that where possible, we should be using it.
Tell you what, it all makes for an interesting discussion at the very least. Thanks very much for coming through and sharing with us what you found. Really appreciate it. Tamara Parker is CEO of Mercer South Africa. Once again, thanks very much indeed.